approaching the beach here, and fun and sun always reminds me of UK goth punk legends, The Damned, one of the big three class of '77 English punk bands, my personal favorite, and also probably objectively musically the best. I love the Pistols and the Clash, but you know, the Pistols made that one great album, and the Clash gets a bit insufferable with their politics, especially since it was mainly coming from their manager Bernie Rhodes, who was an intelligence agency guy. Actually, intelligence agencies are really involved in the whole punk thing, but I could get wrapped up talking about that, and I'm not going to. So I noticed, well, I didn't notice, I kind of knew. Next month, February, is going to be the reunion shows with the original lineup. Rat, Dave, Captain, and Brian. So it's good to see they put their differences aside. I know there was a problem between Rat and Sensible over some money, and this will be the first time that they played together as a four-piece since maybe '91, when they did that tour where they split the set in half. The set would be split down the middle of the original band. They would open the show doing songs from the first two albums. And then for the second half, Paul Gray, was it Paul Gray or was it Bryn Merrick? Might have been either of those guys or both of them. Would come out and do bass, whereas Captain would move to guitar, and they'd do like the other material, Machine Gun Etiquette, Strawberries, things like that. Probably not as much as Strawberries as I'd like, because that album's great. But so that was '91, right? So it's been a long time since they've done anything together, and I'm just happy to see that they mended bridges enough, or mended fences and built bridges, or burned fences, or I'm not sure how that goes, but I'm in the ballpark, long enough to get it together to tour. Now, I'm sure, as with all damn tours, there's of course a money situation, and that just fucking irks me. That irks me. Like, these guys still kind of struggle, you know, with what they achieved, and their brilliant music, and the importance of what they were doing, and as far as authenticity, far more legit than a lot of their peers, and musically just like so much better, or offered. And I don't mean just the Pistols and the Clash, I mean like a lot of those groups. And there's like the big three, and there are people that are always trying to shoehorn someone else in, but really, as far as the public consciousness, that was the guy was just staring. I think you wanted to mandate it's those three, you know. And you hear people will, you know, mention the Jam, and you know the Jam's great. As far as bands that were around earlier, Johnny Moped, the Stranglers. I mean, there's always, all of those guys were part of that scene, and they all have some claim to that, certainly. But in the public consciousness and in mainstream sort of social consciousness, it's those three. It's the Pistols, the Damned, and the Clash. So throughout their career, though, the Damned has always been behind the eight ball as far as financial gain or financial return. In the movie Don't You Wish That We Were Dead, there's a scene where they're backstage and someone brings a pizza backstage, and Dave was singing Neat, Neat, Neat with pizza and a can of Boulder's pizza. Pretty funny, pretty, I mean, it's funny, but at the same time it's sad. You know, he's, I read somewhere that he had to move house, and he had to get rid of a lot of his, I guess, antique furniture. I'm sure he had a lot of cool shit. And the idea that that man can't have his antique bureau really bothers me, because he should have that castle he always wanted. You know, I mean, look at the dosh the fucking Steve Jones has. You know, I mean, the Pistols, though, it took them a while to get their money. You know, they were mismanaged by intelligence agency guy. That's the whole thing too. It's like, it's hard to talk about this stuff, especially the financial situation, without thinking about or taking into account the sort of social experiment aspect of this. But with the Damned, Brian James was a guy. Well, originally Brian Robertson changed his name because Brian Robertson was a guitar player in Thin Lizzy at the time. He had the vision. I think what these intelligence agency dudes were on about, they didn't really have the musical ideas. They had like a visual, and they knew what they wanted to do with society, and they knew where they wanted to steer society. But Brian had the idea for the music. You know, he was kind of going in this direction anyway, and it was based off mainly the garage scene and the Detroit sound, like Iggy and the Stooges, MC5. It was like an amalgamation of that kind of stuff. What would probably be called like indie music now, or alternative music, would be what they were listening to and into. And Brian really loved that stuff. And originally, he was in a group with Mick Jones and Tony, what the hell is the guy? Tony James from Zig Zig Sputnik and Generation X. Big fan. I cannot think of Tony James, right? Am I having an aneurysm? Yeah. They were in a band called London SS, which you would say, well, that sounds a bit anti-Semitic. And yeah, it does. But it was done by Jewish guys. That, you know, Israeli intelligence started getting that whole thing together. See, how do you talk about it without getting to that part? Because it's you know, it's a big part of what was going on there. I'm going to try to cut over to this side so I can see the whole ocean for a change. I'm always walking between buildings and stuff. But yeah, they basically were getting a pool of young musicians together to wear clothes from Malcolm McLaurin's store. And I mean, there was a social experiment, or, you know, social manipulation, in the same way that the hippie movement was socially manipulated in the 1960s. The Laurel Canyon crew, I mean, a lot of those guys that were in bands at that time, their parents were military, or in the case of, you know, Jim Morrison's dad was there at the supposed Gulf of Tonkin event that kicked off Vietnam, which, you know, I'm saying that I'm thinking that was a false flag, right? I mean, his dad was a captain of the ship involved in that. Frank Zappa's parents worked on the MK Ultra project. And you see this happen a lot in entertainment, where, you know, movie stars or musicians have military. You know, they have military parents and military families. It's like, you know, hey, we'll put my daughter in. She'll be the singer, you know, and that's what they used to do. Now with the UK punk thing, I felt like maybe some of these guys were legitimately from Council Flats and stuff like that, or because that's how the beast works. Sometimes he'll create something. It's not a he. Something will be created whole cloth, you know, like the parts will be created from the ground up. And then sometimes it'll see what you're doing and say, oh yeah, I can use that. And then they put you under the wing. So I think that was more the case, what was happening with the class of 77. But Brian from the Damned, he had the vision. Prior to London SS, Mick Jones and, God, another senior moment here. Mick Jones, Joe Strummer, thank you. These guys were like long-haired hippie types playing pub rock, singing songs about like love and things like that, just regular rock and roll kind of topics. And they boy banded it up. Like it very much was the whole 77 thing it was like a boy band type thing, you know, except there was a different aesthetic, of course. But that's probably one of the problems I have the most with the Clash, is they were always so ride or die with these political causes, but they didn't fucking know anything about them. I mean, who knows what British kid in a council flat has any understanding of the political complications of what's going on with Nicaragua? An intelligence agency guy would know that. And Bernie Rhodes would like take their lyrics and rewrite them. So it's like maybe over time they became aware of these causes and felt some degree of care. They started to care about them, but they certainly were the most, well, I don't want to say they were phony. They weren't phony. I mean, these guys had to play all this stuff, and they had to get in the band. They had to tour. But they were the most changed by it, by the social experimentation, manipulation, whatever you want to call it. And they were so adamant about the stuff that they had just really learned about. And the reason the Damned, I think, had that problem where they didn't get the pass is because of their politics. They weren't talking about the kind of things that a Rolling Stone writer wants to champion. Because the Rolling Stone people are in the same part of that group too. The intelligence agency people, they're all, so of course they push them. The Damned weren't very political. In fact, they had a song on the first album called Politics, which talks about how they're not very political. And they don't really, actually, was that on Music for Pleasure? No, that was on the first album. I kind of get those two mixed up sometimes. They're not my favorite ones. Like, I think the golden period there for them is Machine Gun Etiquette through to Strawberries. I mean, the first two are very important. I mean, the first one, especially being the first UK punk album, in a lot of ways, I think the first real punk album. I mean, yeah, you had the Ramones, but they were more just like a throwback to 60s rock, a la like New York Dolls or something, you know? What people would come to know as punk rock, as far as sound and aesthetic, comes from that 77 class, in my opinion. But the Damned wasn't political, and they weren't on the team. And I think something happened between them and Malcolm, because they were in Malcolm's crew. In fact, they were interchanging members all the time. Sid Vicious almost sang for the Damned. And they were constantly switching guys around based on who looked cool next to someone else. You know, it really was a lot about the look and the image. Music was secondary. But luckily you had great musicians there, like Brian James and Rat Scabies, probably the most underrated drummer in rock and roll. A lot of guys, especially in metal, talk about how, I love Keith Moon, and you know, he's the inheritor of Keith Moon's sticks. That guy was really like Keith Moon. And of course, you know, Sensible, yeah, some great, Joe Strummer's great, you know. They got lucky. There was luck added with a lot of planning, and of course a lot of manipulation to get that whole thing off the ground. But the Damned, I think, had some problem early on, where it feels to me like they got dropped out of the circle. because Malcolm in particular would pretty much went on a campaign to claim that they were phonies and they weren't punks and this and that, to kind of discredit them in some way. So they did something to make him unhappy, and that arm of the beast really doesn't like being rebuked. Those people don't like to. Those people, they don't like it. They don't like when you fuck with them in some way. So or not take what they're offering you. And yeah, I think that's kind of what happened. Something happened, and it's not that anarchy tour bullshit thing. And if you don't know what that is, they set up a tour called the Anarchy Tour, and it was the Clash, the Sex Pistols, and the Damned with Johnny Thunders and the Heartbreakers, and they came to one. The whole thing about the tour was none of the bands except the Damned had played outside London. The Damned had been playing outside London, building up a small following in these places that they would play pretty regularly. The Pistols and the Clash especially really didn't have a lot of or any experience outside of London. So Malcolm's idea was we'll basically go with the Damned to the places they regularly play. We'll book those places, and we'll get everybody, to play at these gigs. So they got to one venue that I'm pretty sure the Damned had played before, and they kind of had some relationship with them. And it was after the Grundy incident on TV, and if you don't know what that is, I can't go into all these things. Anyway, the Sex Pistols had made headlines with some bad behavior on TV, and subsequently the gig was canceled because of this. Or they said that they couldn't, the gig wasn't canceled, but they said the Sex Pistols couldn't play. So then the Clash, of course, didn't, how you doing? Sorry. The Clash, of course, didn't play because Bernie was their manager, and him and Malcolm are tight. Same intelligence agency, same tribe, same deal. So the Damned was like, well, we'll play because, I think they knew these people and they'd played there before, and, they didn't want to stiff them. So that caused kind of a rift because Malcolm thought they should blow the gig off too, like everybody else, and they didn't do that. So he was a bit salty about that, but it had to be something more serious, or I don't know if it's something they did or something that was just decided in the executive sort of branch. We're like, okay, we don't need these guys anymore, they're causing too much trouble, or whatever it was. They lost their affiliation with the government people, and it's been a fucking struggle ever since for those guys to get anything, and they deserve the most out of any of that crew. And I think that's why, if you're a fan of theirs, you become very loyal and very into them, because it's just like such a fucking travesty, that Dave Vanian has to sell his antique bassinet at almost the age of 60. It really, really makes me unhappy with what he's given us and what he's done, the happiness he's brought, and the culture he helped transform, whatever, he meant to or not. I mean, the guy helped start punk, and just as a side thing, started goth rock. So it's like, yeah, it just kind of, there's the injustice of the Damned. There's not so much the curse of the Damned. People talk about the curse of the Damned. I don't think they're cursed. I think it stems from them being part of some kind of system that they got kicked out of for whatever reason. But I'm going to I'm going to ride this up. I'm going to wrap this up right now. I'm going to wrap and I'm going to tie. Wrap and tie. Don't blame the teacher. Blame the school.